Picture this for a moment. You're driving home late at night. The road is quiet. Your hands are steady on the wheel. Then suddenly, flashing lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over, just like you always have. You think you know the routine. You think you understand your rights. But what if, in that exact moment, the rules you've been relying on for years have quietly changed and you don't even realize it? Now let me ask you something. If a police officer approached your car tonight, would you actually know which of your rights still apply in 2026 and which ones no longer protect you the way they used to? Go ahead and think about that. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I want you to drop your answer in the comments. Do you feel confident about your rights during a traffic stop, or are you just assuming you know? Because what we're about to uncover isn't just another minor legal update. It's a shift in how traffic law is enforced across parts of the United States, and in some cases, how your behavior in those first few seconds can legally change the outcome of that entire encounter. And the truth is, most drivers still don't know. To understand what changed in 2026, you have to first understand something deeper: how traffic laws in America actually evolve. They don't usually change overnight with a single dramatic announcement. Instead, they shift through a combination of court rulings, state-level legislation, and subtle reinterpretations of existing laws. And sometimes, the most important changes are the ones that don't make headlines. Over the past decade, courts across the United States have been grappling with a growing question. How much authority does a police officer really have during a routine traffic stop? And where are the limits? Historically, traffic stops have always been considered one of the most common forms of interaction between citizens and law enforcement. Millions happen every year, and because of that, courts have repeatedly tried to define what's reasonable, what's lawful, and what crosses the line. But here's where things get interesting. In 2026, a series of legal developments, some at the federal level, others at the state level, began to reshape one specific aspect of traffic stops: what officers can legally require from you, and how your response, or even your hesitation, can be interpreted under the law. One of the most significant changes revolves around the concept of compliance and reasonable suspicion. Now, those are legal terms that might sound complicated, but let's break them down in a simple way. Reasonable suspicion is the standard that allows an officer to take certain actions, like asking you to step out of the vehicle, questioning you further, or in some cases, extending the duration of a stop. For years, courts have debated what counts as reasonable suspicion. Is it nervous behavior? Is it avoiding eye contact? Is it inconsistent answers? In 2026, new rulings clarified, and in some interpretations expanded, what can be considered suspicious behavior during a traffic stop. And this is where most drivers get caught off guard, because the change isn't about what you did before you were pulled over. It's about what you do after the officer approaches your window. Imagine this scenario. An officer pulls you over for a minor violation, maybe a broken tail light or slightly exceeding the speed limit. Nothing serious. You're calm, but maybe a little nervous. Your hands move a bit. Your voice isn't perfectly steady. In the past, that alone might not have meant much. But in light of newer interpretations, certain combinations of behavior, nervousness, delayed responses, or even over-explaining can contribute to an officer forming reasonable suspicion that something else is going on. And once that threshold is crossed, the entire nature of the stop can legally change. The officer may be allowed to ask more questions. They may request you step out of the vehicle. In some cases, they may call for additional units or conduct further checks, all within the boundaries of the law. Now here's the key point. None of this requires you to have committed a serious crime. It's about how your behavior is interpreted in real time. Let me ask you this. If you were nervous during a traffic stop, even if you had done nothing wrong, do you think that could work against you? For many people, the honest answer is yes. And that's exactly why this shift matters. Another important development tied into this 2026 change involves the increasing role of in-car technology and documentation. Modern police vehicles are equipped with dash cams, body cams, and digital reporting systems. Every movement, every word, every pause can be recorded and later reviewed. This has created a new layer of legal scrutiny, not just for officers, but for drivers as well. Because now, behavior during a stop isn't just judged in the moment. It can be analyzed later, in detail, frame by frame, if necessary. And that has influenced how courts evaluate these encounters. In several recent cases, courts have upheld officers' decisions based on a combination of subtle behavioral cues, things that might seem insignificant to the average person, but are considered meaningful in a legal context. context. This doesn't mean the system is unfair or biased by design. It means the legal standards are evolving in response to new realities. But the gap between what the law says and what the average driver understands is growing wider. And that's where the real problem lies, because most people still approach traffic stops based on what they've heard over the years, from friends, from the internet, from outdated advice. They assume they know their rights, but they don't realize those rights are being interpreted differently today than they were even a few years ago. Let's talk about another aspect that changed in 2026: how long a traffic stop can legally last. Traditionally, a traffic stop is supposed to be limited in scope and duration. An officer pulls you over, addresses the reason for the stop, checks your documents, and either issues a warning or a citation. Simple. But the question has always been, how long is too long? In recent years, courts have clarified that a stop cannot be extended beyond its original purpose without additional justification. However, the definition of additional justification has become more nuanced. In 2026, several rulings emphasize that if an officer develops reasonable suspicion during the course of the stop, even based on small behavioral cues, they may be allowed to extend the interaction. And this is where many drivers unintentionally make mistakes. They believe that once the original reason for the stop is addressed, they're free to go. But if the officer has legally established reasonable suspicion, even briefly, the stop can continue. And again, this often hinges on interpretation, your tone, your timing, your responses. Let's pause for a second and reflect. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt nervous, even though you had nothing to hide? That's a very human reaction. But in a legal context, human reactions can sometimes be misunderstood, and that's why awareness matters. Now, it's important to say this clearly. These changes do not remove your rights. You still have constitutional protections. You still have the right to remain silent. You still have the right to refuse certain searches under specific conditions. But what has changed is how your behavior is used to justify the next steps in an encounter. And that's a subtle but powerful difference. Let's consider a real-world type of scenario that reflects this shift. A driver is pulled over for a minor traffic violation. The officer approaches, asks for license and registration. The driver complies but appears visibly anxious. Their hands shake slightly. They avoid eye contact. When asked a simple question, they provide a long, detailed explanation. None of this is illegal, but taken together, an officer might interpret this as unusual behavior. That interpretation can then form the basis for reasonable suspicion, and once that threshold is met, the legal framework changes. Now, the officer may ask additional questions. They may request consent to search the vehicle. They may take steps that go beyond the original purpose of the stop, and all of it can be legally justified. Now think about this. Would you recognize the moment when a routine traffic stop becomes something more? Most people wouldn't, and that's exactly why this topic is so important. Because the law isn't just about what's written in statutes. It's about how those statutes are applied in real-life situations. And in 2026, that application has become more nuanced, more context-driven, and in some ways, more dependent on human interpretation. Another layer to this change involves driver communication. In recent years, there has been increased emphasis on clarity and consistency in how drivers respond to officers. Inconsistent answers, even about simple things like where you're coming from or where you're going, can raise questions. Again, this doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, but it can influence how the interaction unfolds. So let me ask you another question. When you're under pressure, do you think your answers are always clear and consistent? For most people, the honest answer is no. And that's why understanding these dynamics matters. Because the goal isn't to create fear or anxiety. The goal is awareness. Awareness of how the system works. Awareness of how your behavior can be perceived. And awareness of how small details can have larger consequences. At the same time, it's equally important to recognize that these legal standards are not unlimited. Courts continue to review and challenge law enforcement actions. There are still boundaries. There are still protections in place. If an officer acts outside the law, there are mechanisms for accountability. But those mechanisms often come into play after the fact, which means your experience in the moment still matters. And that brings us back to where we started. Those first few seconds of a traffic stop, the moment when the lights appear behind you, the moment when the officer approaches your window, the moment when everything you do, your movements, your words, your tone, begins to shape the interaction. In 2026, those moments carry more legal weight than most people realize. Not because the law is trying to trap you, but because the standards for interpretation have evolved. And if you're not aware of that evolution, you may be relying on outdated assumptions. So here's something to think about. What if the biggest mistake drivers make isn't breaking the law, but misunderstanding how the law is applied? That's a question worth considering. And if you've ever had an experience with a traffic stop, good or bad, I'd encourage you to share it in the comments. Because the more we talk about these real-world situations, the better we understand them. As we come to the end of this discussion, one thing becomes clear. The law is not static. It changes, it adapts, it responds to new technologies, new cases, and new interpretations. And while those changes are often made with the intention of improving clarity and fairness, they can also create confusion for the average person, especially when those changes aren't widely understood. So the next time you're on the road, remember this. It's not just about knowing the rules. It's about understanding how those rules are applied in real time. It's about recognizing that your behavior, no matter how innocent, can be interpreted in ways you might not expect. And it's about staying informed, not just for your own protection, but for your own confidence. Because when you understand the system, you're no longer guessing, you're aware, you're prepared, and that changes everything. So I'll leave you with one final thought. Do you think most drivers today truly understand their rights during a traffic stop? Or are they operating on assumptions that are already outdated? Let me know what you think.